Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Discover North Korea. I am your host, Zoe, from Zoe Discovers, and today I'm joined by one of my colleagues and best friends, Greg. If you don't know Greg, he's the North Korea tour manager at Koryo Tours, the oldest and best company working in North Korea tourism. And whilst Greg certainly isn't the oldest, he's probably definitely the best in managing those tours and making them run as smoothly as possible. During the pandemic, Greg has been all over the world, from South Korea to Iceland, Hong Kong to Hungary, and it's been hard to pin him down or indeed know where he is. But pin him down I did, which is super lucky for you guys because, as well as being an expert tour manager, Greg is also an expert in all things transportation. As an aviation fanatic, Greg is constantly telling me about the different plane models he's flown in, and the only souvenir he asked me to get him from Fiji was the slippers from the long haul flight there. Unfortunately, time kept us apart for much longer than we originally thought, and I kept those slippers for a year in Tonga before I finally opened them and wore them myself. Sorry about that, Greg. Originally, we had planned a whole episode on transportation, but we got stuck on Air Koryo for pretty much the whole time, so I'll just have to get Greg back on the podcast again for another one. Before we start, I want to say a massive thank you to Greg for agreeing to come on the show, and hopefully you'll be back for much more very soon. So take your seats, buckle in, and prepare for some turbulent discussion on Air Koryo, North Korea's national airline. So hello, Greg. How are you doing? It's
Hi
not
Zoe.
it's not been too long since we last spoke. We were last together virtually doing I think probably a few episodes back with Nick and Simon um on things that we miss about North Korea. But this time it's going to be a bit more exciting, maybe for you because you're a big transport fanatic.
I am, yes.
I knew I got the
I would
right person.
consider myself as an aviation geek, actually.
Aviation geek.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
definitely.
also, riding trains in China made me a train geek as well, because the Chinese railway system is so good, actually. It's
I agree.
surpassing on time. It's clean. It's comfortable. Like my best sleeps are on the train, actually, overnight train in China. And I just came back from India, actually, where I took an overnight train, and you can sleep quite well on an Indian train as well. But
Really?
the infrastructure, yes, like I did a sleeper train as well, but the infrastructure is just so much worse than in China.
Hmm.
So I know it's not about China versus India, but you can see how China invests its accumulated wealth in improving infrastructure, as opposed to India, where it's more like just they're creating gated communities and like a bubble for those who are part of this economic development in India, but then the rest of the population and the infrastructure doesn't get any attention.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I felt like after living in Beijing for so long and then visiting India, like it's something that really is quite in your face. Again, not like doing China versus India, but there are like massive noticeable differences. And I think like the biggest one is arguably in the infrastructure. And like I love Chinese trains. I have to agree with you, Greg. Like honestly, whenever we take the train to North Korea or like just any train in China. I love the overnight trains. I think they're amazing. I've taken like the really cheap ones, like just the standard normal trains that like, are like 6 beds per little area. And then I've also
Mm.
taken overnight one of the really posh ones. I think it was Kunming to Beijing. And I don't know if you've taken one of these really posh ones before, but it's like the
Mm.
high speed overnight train. So like it's high speed and really fast, but also really posh at the same time, like one of the newer trains. And you get this whole like it's like staying in a hostel. Like the train, there's only about, I swear, like 20 people per carriage, and you get like your own little area with a curtain, and like your bed has like a little desk next to it. Like it's
Mm.
really fancy. I don't know, you probably know which train I'm talking about, but
Yeah, I haven't taken it as an overnight train. So I took it from Nanjing to Chengdu.
mm,
And since it was during the day, it was just a regular sitting train. with compartments. Um, but you could see, yeah, that there was like a TV monitor at the head of all the, which are supposed to be bed during the night, and so on.
Ah,
Yes,
yeah.
but also the first time I was traveling in China, actually it is the same time as when I was traveling from Nanjing to Chengdu. We were a bit late for booking train tickets, so we
Mm.
ended up traveling all over China, mostly on hard seat trains overnight.
Oh no.
So like every second night I spent on a train sitting for like 8+ hours
Oh
trying
man.
to sleep.
And just for listeners of those who don't know, who those who haven't taken a Chinese train before, there's basically like, I mean, again, Greg probably knows better the different types of trains, so I won't speak about that. But in terms of like the ticketing system, there are various tickets you can buy, and I suppose the nicest one, which you want for a ride that's probably like longer than 6 or 7 hours, is a bed where it's actually a physically bed. So we call this soft sleeper. And this is for like the overnight trains. And then you have hard sleeper. Oh wait, no. Yeah. And then a bed, which is soft sleeper, is only 4 to 1 little room. And you do get like a little enclosed room. And then the hard sleeper, which is like the standard for like overnight trains. I mean, unless you really want a soft sleeper, a hard sleeper is fine. But you are in a carriage of about I can't do maths, but it must be about 60 people per carriage if you have 6 in each little area, and then there are
Mm.
about 5 little areas. So maybe just under 60,
No,
maybe more
I
about
think there's
40.
more than 10
Oh, there's
little
more than
areas.
10.
That that that
Okay.
that would make it 60. Yeah.
Yeah, which sounds terrifying, sharing a cabin and trying to sleep in it like a cabin with 60 people, but it's actually not that bad, and everyone seems to be pretty respectful. Obviously, you can't help the big snorers, but the lights do go off, and then I think people tend to be quite good about it. And then, as Greg was saying, there is the seats, which basically is a whole different area to the train, and you just get a seat. And then there is one worse category, which is the standing category. And I have been on, so we had a bit of a mess up. Actually, it wasn't with Koryo Tours, it was with my previous tour company. We had a bit of a mess up where we didn't buy we were 1 ticket short to go to North Korea. And usually there would probably be seats left, but this was a national holiday. I can't remember which national holiday it was. Um, and so as the tour guide, we like there was 2 tour guides, like 2 Western tour guides, on the same trip. So we had to kind of forfeit our own seat, or our own bed to give it to one of the customers. Now, the only thing that was left was just standing. And it was kind of awful, but it gave me a really interesting insight to how this bit works, because it's actually very interesting. And as you said at the start, Greg, like how Chinese trains work functions so well. So basically, like, and this is really useful for anyone traveling on the trains in China, like if you cannot get a ticket before you get on the train, there is obviously people who don't end up getting the train, right? They've bought a ticket and they don't end
Mm.
up getting the train. And on the train, you are checked in. It's kind of like, I think getting a train in China is kind of like getting a flight at the airport. Like you have to have your passport with you, you have to be checked in, like this is security, stuff like that. And so when you get on the train, you're then checked in. And so it takes about 20 minutes for them to check everyone. And during this time, if you are a standing passenger and you want to be upgraded, or if you're a seated passenger and you want to be upgraded, you can tell the train manager. They put your name on a list, and then you go onto like a waiting list for all of the people who didn't get on the train. And now, if you're lucky, when you get on at Beijing or wherever, there's already like a few people who didn't get on. So you can just change right over, within half an hour. If you're unlucky, you might have to wait like 3 or 4 hours for the next few stops before it reaches your name. Um,
Or won't upgrade it at all.
yeah, or don't upgrade at all. That is so. And it's chaotic. It was horrible at that time. Like it's just like there were pretty much like at least 50 or 60 standing people who wanted to get upgrades. We were all crammed in, literally just standing on the train waiting for someone to shout out our name from the waiting list. But yeah, that's a little hack that I suppose not many people might know in China. So but yeah, I do love the China trains.
But yeah, the like hard seater and the sleeping part of the train is a whole different world.
Yes.
But I always say that as long as you haven't been on a hard seat train in China, you've never been in China. Because
Very true.
it does give you an insight what you wouldn't experience anywhere else.
Hmm. It's very true. And I think like even though the train tickets are fairly cheap and like actually really cheap compared to European trains and cheap for what they are, like a lot of people in China can't afford those higher like the soft sleeper and hard sleeper tickets.
Well, that's one thing, but also quite often you can see pretty well of people traveling on hard seat, and it's just because they didn't buy the tickets on time
Right.
and they didn't have the chance to, there were no beds left.
Mm.
So it's not always so the difference between the passengers of the seater and the sleeper is not necessarily a difference in social status. It's just a difference in quick reaction or planning ahead.
Yes, true.
What Chinese people are not that good about. Like when I was employed by a Chinese school and I had my bosses being Chinese, like further notice is something which does not exist. Like I think the most extreme situation was when I was called around 11 p.m. that okay, you have to be at school next morning at 7 and prepare your class for a performance because some party officials are coming to see how our school is doing, like 10
Ooh.
o'clock in the morning. And it's like, okay, like first of all, you don't call me at 11 p.m. Second of all, how am I supposed to prepare my stuff for a performance or my class for a performance in like 3 hours? But okay, we managed to come up with something, but still, yeah.
Yeah.
Further notice is and like planning ahead is not the strength of Chinese people. That's my experience, at least.
Yeah, fair enough. And I think what you said about like them being two different worlds is totally true because not only can you physically not access the soft and hard sleeper area, when you have a like chair ticket, just a seated ticket, you can't access those areas. So not only that, but also everything that Greg was saying as well, that you were saying as well.
Although if the rest, because usually it's so the restaurant car is in between
Mm.
the sleeper carriages and the seating carriages.
Yeah.
So and I could like go into the seating compartments as
You
a
can sneak
sleeper ticket.
through. Yeah, but sometimes they get you. Sometimes they are
Mhm.
genuinely like, you are not allowed to go through to the rest to this like through this area. I mean they've done that on the North Korean train as well. Like, does the restaurant cart separate the Koreans and the well, what does the restaurant cart separate in
Yes,
on the Korean one?
I think they do. Yes.
Because I definitely remember being not told to go one way, but maybe that was just one instance. It's been so long
It
now.
Yeah, but as always in North Korea, a lot of things are negotiable.
That's
So
true.
uh, you can just like, okay, but like my friends are there, and like, oh, okay, just and then they're just going to make sure that you are being in your right place just before you reach Sinuju.
Yes, yeah, just as you said that, I realized what it was. It's the fact that if you get off the train internally, then you like, for example, if you are going to Beijing or going to China from Pyongyang, if you are getting off in Sinuiju, you are put in the different area because that's like the area for the people who get off internally, like domestically, and then the other area is for the people who are going all the way to China, right?
No, it's more complex because
Oh.
uh, then you also have the train which also only goes to Dandong, which is again a
Oh
separate
yeah.
one from the one which goes all the way to Beijing.
It's very complicated.
Yeah. But the thing is that as long as you are at your right place when the train arrives in Sinuiju, they will overlook the fact that you crossed into a different territory than yours.
Oh.
And again, that's what is so absurd about the DPRK, that there are certain rules which are like ridiculous from Westerner, and I don't have to talk about that because everyone knows it from the news and stuff. And then there are things which would never be possible in other countries, and they just like, yeah, of course, why not? To give you an example, 2019 April, Kim Il Sung's birthday, we had quite a successful tour, i.e. we had like, I don't know, I can't remember how many groups, but we had to accommodate at least 80 people on the flight.
Wow.
And usually we send our estimated numbers to Air Koryo at the beginning of the year, and we kind of update it and stuff. So when we sent the actual bookings, they said that no, there's no more seats on the flight because it's all taken by like official delegations going.
I remember this. This was a very
Yeah,
stressful time.
that's when you were flying Air China, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, you remember it so well.
Because I had to I had to take care of this mess
Oh
caused by Air
yeah,
Koryo.
I was in North Korea at the time, right? And I was trying to, was I in North Korea and I was trying to figure this out with with our partners in North Korea, and
Probably before that, I'm not sure, but
yeah, anyway, carry on.
so basically we could only get 10 tickets for the flight on Saturday, and then I think it was like 20 tickets for Air China on Friday, and the remaining 50 tickets on the Friday flight for Air Koryo. However, the problem was that a lot of people had to go into the country a day before, and most of the customers arrived luckily on Thursday or a couple of days before, but there were quite a few who arrived on Friday when the Friday flight was. So we raised it with Air Koryo, but okay, so we can, put this many people on the flight on Friday. However, there are quite a few people who wouldn't make it because they're just arriving in China on Friday. However, they were all arriving in the morning because in the afternoon they should have been at the Air Koryo office for the briefing. And we figured out that, okay, if somehow Air Koryo could delay the flight, which they definitely capable of doing, because once I was delayed for like 3 hours waiting for Japanese Koreans arriving to Beijing,
Oh,
taking the
really?
flight to Pyongyang. And when we arrived to Pyongyang, I saw their luggage tag, and the flight they were taking, so the Japan Airlines flight they were taking from Tokyo to Beijing was scheduled to land in Beijing an hour after the Air Koryo flight was scheduled to depart. So I knew that Air Koryo can do this kind of thing. So I said, okay, so why don't you just delay the flight so that everyone who is arriving on Friday morning can make it? And they did make it happen.
They did.
They did. So they delayed the flight for 2 hours.
Wow, I feel like you have such power here.
It's not me. It's Air Koryo. It's Koryo too. It's not me personally. And I think our partners at KITC are also very good in, dealing with Air Koryo. So it did happen. But also once I had a customer who was flying in from Hong Kong, and her flight was delayed, and he had a very short gap between her flight from Hong Kong and our flight to Pyongyang. So I was talking to the station manager of Air Koryo in Beijing. Okay, so I have this customer. She just landed in Beijing. Can we wait for her? Here is her DPRK visa. So I gave the DPRK visa to the station manager at check-in.
Oh,
They
wow.
issued a boarding pass to her based on the boarding pass and the copy of her passport. I was managed to get from our database, and then they did wait for her to catch the flight.
Wow. That's amazing, actually.
And also, like so they were waiting for her at the check-in desk, and then they expedited her process through immigration and security. And they were running together with the Air Koryo representative to the gate. And I was at the gate. I didn't board the flight. I was like, okay, wait. Your colleague is coming with a customer, so don't
That's
go yet.
that's fantastic. I feel like yeah, maybe Air Koryo is not one of the world's worst airlines in the world after all.
It
Definitely
isn't.
more
It isn't.
flexible. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was gonna, I mean, that is probably one of the biggest questions that a lot of people want to know here is, is Air Koryo really that bad? Firstly, before we get onto that though, maybe you could just talk a little bit about, because I'm sure people are wondering, how do you I mean, firstly, I want to let people know that there are pretty much two ways to get into North Korea. There's either the train or the plane. And I mean, technically you can also kind of drive over the border in Rasan, but those are the two main ways
Hmm.
that people get into North Korea. And North Korea obviously has their own what do you call it? Their own company, air travel
Airline.
airline. Yeah, thank you. See, this is why you're the expert. North Korea have their own airline called Air Koryo, and they are very famous for being the world's worst airline. But I think there's a lot of reasons why it gets that status, and a lot of reasons why it doesn't get that status. We will talk about that. But firstly, a lot of people might be wondering, can you just head on to Skyscanner or like Google Flights and purchase a ticket and an Air Koryo ticket? Or how do you go about buying a flight to North Korea?
No, you can't go directly through the airline or any other agencies. Um, Although I think it appears on Amadeus search engines, which sometimes causes us trouble because the information uploaded there is not representing reality, and sometimes there are some customers who to quote someone like to take their face into their own hands, and they double check everything, and then they come back to me that okay, but on Amadeus it shows a different departure date and departure time and so on. It also still says that they still have available spaces and stuff like that. But that's just there. I don't know why.
Mm.
No, you can only purchase tickets through Air Koryo, but we don't really deal with Air Koryo directly. Um, we deal with a local partner, KITC. And
Mm.
also, actually, our company, Koryo Tours, is sometimes helping other entities who are not our tourists to secure a flight ticket to Pyongyang. So we do it with through KITC.
Mm.
Um, However, there are Air Koryo offices in Beijing, Shenyang, probably in Hong Kong as well. Actually I could go and check today
Oh yeah,
because I'm
you're in
Hong
Hong
Kong.
Kong.
I'm in Hong Kong right now. But there are like Air Koryo offices in quite a few cities overseas. So I'm sure you could go in as long as you have the proper documentation. But they won't issue a ticket for you just when you say, okay, I want to go to Pyongyang. You have to, you have to prove that you have a sponsor, and that's the main thing in everything related to traveling into Korea, is
Mm.
that you need a sponsor who is responsible for you from the time you set your foot in the country until you leave.
Mm.
And I believe that because for example, embassies, they get their flight tickets, and I'm sure that they don't go through KITC. Uh, and that is the reason why they have airline offices uh, in Beijing, Shenyang, etc. So it's or the question of having the right documentation. But to answer your question in a nutshell, you cannot purchase your Air Koryo flight tickets online. It's definitely in person.
I would really like you to see after we chat. I would really like you to see if there is one in Hong Kong and nip into the office and see if I mean, not that there is any flights going in and out of North
Yeah.
Korea at the moment, but it would be great for you to attempt to at least inquire about purchasing.
Sorry, one more thing. And the other thing is that they actually cut off from the international ticketing system. So
Oh, that's
basically,
interesting.
so basically, one of the reasons why check-in for an Air Koryo flight in Beijing or Shenyang is taking so long, because basically what happens that the check-in agents have a printout list of the passengers with their names and probably with also the e-ticket number is on that printout. So basically they have to identify you on the list first and then put all your information into their system, and then they can issue the boarding pass.
It does take a long time. I always wondered why. So that is why it's taking forever.
Yeah.
Okay. So for those that do want to buy a plane ticket to Pyongyang or to North Korea, then as Greg was saying, you do have to go through a third party or a fourth party. You have to go through lots of alleyways. And the easiest way is to go through a tour company like Koryo Tours. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about Air Koryo, because to be honest, I actually don't, I've flown on it so many times, but I do not know much about Air Koryo apart from the somewhat rude air hostesses and the weird Koryo burger that, is mystery meat Koryo burger. Maybe you can give us some background on Air Koryo as an airline, or just, why does it have the status of the world's worst airline? And do you think it's justified?
Why does it have? Because it sounds sexy that someone flew the worst airline. Also because it has an aging fleet, but the aging fleet is only used for domestic flights and to Vladivostok. If you fly from China, and the majority of Western tourists are flying from Beijing, you're going to take one of the new aircrafts. Actually, I just double checked if it's still true. Also, they state that Air Koryo is banned from the EU because it's so unsafe and stuff. But I just double checked what's the most up-to-date list of the European Union air safety list, and Air Koryo is indeed banned from European airspace, with the exception of 2 aircraft of type Tupolev 204 with the tail number P632 and P633. And those are the 2 aircrafts which are actually flying into Beijing. And also there are 2 Antonovs which are quite new. They were delivered to Air Koryo right off from the factory line. They are not on the exception, but they are quite modern, and they are actually the youngest members of the Air Koryo fleet. And also to give you some context, in 2009, I was flying in the US domestic from Sioux Falls, South Dakota to Minneapolis with an aircraft which was produced in 1969. So in the US, I was flying Delta Northwest with an aircraft which was 40 years old. The oldest Air Koryo aircraft I flew was produced in the 1970s, so probably the same age as the American aircraft I flew.
Ah.
But yeah, so again, if you are flying from China, you're going to fly with one of the newer aircrafts. One of them was delivered, like both was one of them was delivered in 2007 to Air Koryo, another one in 2010. and the one which was delivered in 2007 was manufactured in 1993. So,
it's the same age as me.
if you are flying some European airlines or even some airlines in America, you will, fly with aircrafts roughly the same age as those Air Koryo aircrafts. So there is this safety concern. But on the other hand, there was only 2 incidents for Air Koryo which took lives. None of them were scheduled passenger services, and they happened centuries ago. I mean, I think it was in the 1980s when the Air Koryo Aviation aircraft, like a government aircraft, crashed in Africa.
Oh. And that brings up an important point as well. I think, I mean, we've talked about flights from Beijing. Where else does Air Koryo fly internationally? I mean, when they're operating, at the moment they're not. But
so just before COVID, they were flying from Beijing, Shenyang, and Vladivostok to Pyongyang throughout the year. And also in busier periods, they had flights from Shanghai. And also in 2019, they had a couple of, I think, like 4 flights in total from Macau.
oh. Did they used to have flights from Malaysia as well, or did I make that up?
They had flights from Kuala Lumpur, also from Kuwait, because there were quite a few guest workers, North Korean guest workers working in Kuwait. But then, because of the sanctions, I think it was Thailand which first banned Air Koryo from flying in Thai airspace, and then other countries as well. So they didn't circumvent it, and they had to cancel or suspend the flight to Kuwait City. And obviously, until the late 1990s, they were flying to former socialist countries, or during state socialism, they were flying to like Prague, East Berlin, Moscow, Sofia, but not since the 2000s.
So those are the international flights. There's actually a lot more than I think, even now. I mean, we have Vladivostok, which is Russia, and then Shenyang and Beijing. Those are like the standard ones. And I think even that would surprise people that, there's actually multiple destinations. And
there were also like charter flights to South Korea, to Japan, to South Korea during the Sunshine Policy in the early 2000s, and in Japan until they decided to, go hard on the sanctions. Because don't forget that there is a massive North Korean community living in Japan. I mean, historically, most of them are from the southern part of the peninsula, but for various reasons, they identify with the North Korean Association in Japan. And as a result, they are North Korean subjects. And also they have family members in North Korea because there was a ethnic return migration from 1958, if I'm not mistaken, until the late 1980s. And people who stayed behind in Japan could visit their family members in the DPRK.
And you know what, you've just given me an excellent topic for me needing you back on this podcast, because I would love to do an episode on the Chongnyeon, the people that Greg was just talking about, the Koreans in Japan. It would be maybe very interesting for our listeners. So would need to have you back on for that.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite topics, actually. Yeah. So
prepare beforehand. All right. So that's all the international Air Koryo stuff. How about domestic? I've taken 2 Air Koryo flights domestically. You've probably taken a few more, I think.
Well, I took 4 charter flights, like 2 pairs, and then I did a real domestic flight, which was like a scheduled domestic flight.
So
And the domestic flights are the real treats for aviation geeks, because that's when you can fly the old aircrafts. The
okay,
one no one
so
wants to take.
go on. Tell us about a real domestic flight in North Korea.
Okay, so I was going up to Cheongjin in North Hamgyong province, which is in the northeastern part of the country, very close to the China, Russia, Korea border. I was going up well, on a business trip, basically, to see what's possible there and how the hotel's doing, and so on and so on. So I flew a scheduled Air Koryo flight from Pyongyang to Cheongjin. It was during June, so during the summer they use mostly the Tupolev 154 for various reasons. So there is always a domestic audience who is flying, like Koreans, North Koreans are flying between Pyongyang and Cheongjin. And also in 2019 and the year before as well, there were so many Chinese tourists that like more than 1,000 Chinese tourists entered the country every day, that they had to find various ways for them to be able to enter the country. And one of the ways was to enter through North Hamgyong province, then it's near Wangjasan, then drive to Cheongjin, and then take the flight, the domestic scheduled flight down to Pyongyang. So we were flying a Tupolev 154. I think those were produced in the 1970s, but I'm not 100% sure about it. What was interesting that since the domestic flights are departing after the international flights are gone, they will use the international terminal for departures. So we flew from the international terminal, so I was boarding a domestic flight through a jet bridge from Pyongyang airport. And then we just flew up to Cheongjin, which took around like 50 minutes. They had a newspaper and drink service. However, all the announcements, including the safety demonstration, was only in Chinese and Korean. I hope that it was only because they were so confident about my Korean knowledge that they didn't bother to, have the English demonstration for one person who is
And rightly so.
not,
Your Korean is very good.
who is not Chinese or Korean. But it was a bit weird though that we only had it in Chinese and Korean, and all the announcements in Chinese and Korean. Yeah. So, but for me, the real treat was to fly a Tupolev 154, which was also in the fleet of the Hungarian national airline, but I never had a chance to try it.
Yeah, nice. There you go. And so you mentioned that there are domestic flights, which is the one that you just took, but then also chartered flights. And I just wanted to mention for our listeners a little bit about where you can take a flight to in North Korea, and then maybe Greg, you can let us know about the difference between this chartering and domestic. So basically, I mean, actually, Greg, you probably know more than me if I'm going to say now. So whereabouts in North Korea can you take a domestic flight? And when I say domestic, I'm including chartered flights and domestic flights, which we'll talk about in a minute. But where are the airports in North Korea? Where can you fly to?
Pretty much all over the place. But so the two scheduled domestic flights are between Pyongyang and Cheongjin, and Pyongyang and Samjeon. Samjeon is where Paektusan is. And most of the chartered flights are also going to those places. And the reason why we have to charter a flight and not take the domestic flight is just simply the reason behind is the schedule. There is not many things to do. I mean, actually, in North Hamgyong province, you could spend enough time to be between a domestic and between two domestic scheduled flights. But for Samjeon, not really, because you go up to Paektusan, you visit some of the revolutionary sites, and then that's it.
So
And usually there
that's
is 3 nights between, yeah, three and 4 nights between two domestic flights. And also, there are only 2 tours which are going to Paektusan. One is the Liberation Day tour, when you go and come and go, and the other one is the mega tour. And in that case, you fly up to Samjiyon first when it's Paektusan is, and then you fly from Samjiyon to Cheongjin. So basically, you have this triangle flight, which they don't have as a scheduled domestic flight. However, for the Liberation Day tour, and it took quite a lot of negotiation with our local partner, because I came up with the idea of flying for the Liberation Day tour, flying not from Pyongyang but from Wonsan.
you flew at the Kalmar airport? Oh,
Yes, yeah. So
wow.
basically, I said, okay, so there's an airport, there is a new airport, a brand new airport, hardly ever used. We are in Wonsan. Why don't we fly from Wonsan instead of, driving back 4 to 6 hours to Pyongyang, spending the night in Pyongyang, and then take the flight? So I came up with the idea that, okay, we charter the flight or the aircraft from Wonsan to Samjiyon, and then we fly back from Samjiyon to Pyongyang. And then, yeah, but and then okay, then so yeah, we are worried about the weather. That
Nice excuse.
And they worried about the weather because when Michael Palin was filming in North Korea, they did the exactly same thing, and their flight was delayed for hours because of the fog. And they told me that, okay, but if something happens, what happened with Michael Palin, then your whole schedule will be, will be jeopardized, and like until the aircraft took off from Wonsan, our manager was like trying to convince me every single day not to fly from Wonsan, fly from Pyongyang, and he was calling Pyongyang airport like every single day to confirm the weather. And we had that, okay, and we agreed that, okay, if the day before Pyongyang airport says that the weather in Wonsan is not looking good, then you will drive back to Pyongyang and just take the flight from Pyongyang. But then I said, okay, but if there's such a high chance of having fog at Wonsan Kalmar airport and our flight being cancelled, then why on earth did you build an airport at such a inconvenient place weather-wise?
Very, very good point.
But luckily, actually we had fog that morning as well, but it went. But no, I think it couldn't take off from Pyongyang because the weather in Pyongyang wasn't good that morning.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Is that actually what happened?
But then our flight was delayed for just 1 hour, so it
Okay.
wasn't a huge drama.
Amazing. And like, I guess from the plane, you must be able to see quite a lot of, I mean, especially if you're going from Wonsan or even Pyongyang to up to the north, you're traveling for like, how many kilometers is that? Like it's a large proportion of the country, and you must be able to see quite a bit. I mean, I guess if there's not so much fog, but you can see quite a bit of the country, right? They definitely you wouldn't see otherwise. I mean, I remember flying, as Greg was saying before, I took I did that triangle where I went from Pyongyang to Samjiyon and then Samjiyon to Cheongjin. And I remember we had such good weather. It was literally blue skies, and you could see right to the ground for pretty much all the time. It was incredible. And for me, that's just one of those things where, when people say like, oh, but it's all fake and stuff, I'm like, how do you fake so much of a country when you're flying over it?
Well, they can avoid certain areas to
That's
fly
true.
over.
That's very true. And to be honest,
So
they definitely do.
it's not a straight line we take. and it takes longer than it's supposed to be.
Right.
And it's definitely because they want to avoid certain areas.
Certain areas.
The,
Yeah.
the,
No.
the,
Yeah.
the, the ones which have a particular interest on satellite images or Google Maps.
Yeah. That's a really good point.
And also when you land, because most of the domestic airports are also used for military use. So they don't allow to take you pictures and stuff and at the airport. However, I was flying to Gwangju in South Korea in January from Seoul. And Gwangju Airport is also a dual military slash civilian use airport. And as soon as we landed, they asked us to close all the blinds
Oh.
until we taxied all the way into the terminal, to the terminal building, to the jet bridge. And that's when they asked us to open the blinds again.
Wow.
So actually, they do it better in the south because they basically make you not to be able to see anything. But in the north, they just tell you, okay, don't take any pictures.
Mm.
They somehow didn't realize that and maybe I'm giving tips now. I'm sorry if I mess up for future.
No, good.
For the future, but they just simply could direct us to close the blinds as they do it in South Korea.
Don't tell him to do that. Yeah, it was really random for me. Maybe I just never noticed it before. I was a bit naive because when I first got to Taiwan, I've been taking some domestic flights, and I have to say, like, I mean, pretty much every domestic airport here is also used for military. And the military are everywhere here in terms of like flights. So, I live in Tainan, and you see like military planes all the time in the sky. And then if you're nearby to the airport, to Tainan Domestic Airport, you see military planes flying around all the time, and like, but they don't seem to bother about it. Like I was taking videos and pictures at the airport, and then I accidentally realized that in the background is like bunkers with like army camo stuff on, and then I saw two military planes taxiing out as I was waiting to go, and no one really seemed to bother. So I guess maybe things are more tense on the Korean Peninsula. I don't know if you could compare those two things at the moment.
Well, you can always compare them historically, like Taiwan, South Korea, and Vietnam, or Korea, China, and Vietnam. There are quite a few unexplored parallels and similarities.
It's
I had a
very
chat
true.
with Professor Lanko about that.
I'll have to write that down on things that I need to talk to Greg about on the podcast.
But since you are in Taiwan, that's something you should definitely not overlook, that how much similarities are there between South Korea, Taiwan, and cross-strait and cross-DMZ relations, and so on and so on.
I don't know if you...
And the problem is that not many people are paying attention to it, and you also have the benefit of speaking both Korean and Chinese. I
Yeah,
don't have the benefit of speaking Chinese.
but your Korean's a lot better than mine.
So I can't really, focus on that, gap in the academia.
Interesting. Yeah, maybe I could do some research into that bit. We haven't got much time left, so maybe today is an Air Koryo themed one or a plane themed one, because I don't want to cram everything else in. There's so much transport and stuff. I mean, yeah, I'll talk about that in a minute. But so what's a North Korean airport like? It sounds like a silly question, but most of our listeners will never have been to a North Korean airport. Are there any differences between a North Korean airport, both ones that both internationally and domestic terminals? Are there any differences? Are there any similarities? Can you do all of your duty-free shopping at the North Korean airport?
Well, so we have to differentiate between two airports, which are also international, although one of them is really used for international purposes, Pyongyang and Wonsan Airport, and then the rest of the country. But before I go into that, because I was flying in and out of Hong Kong in August, where there was still quarantine in Hong Kong and very few flights. And when I was flying back to Seoul from Hong Kong in August, no, it was in September already. I was like, literally, there is more services in a domestic airport in North Korea, which looks like a train station, than Hong Kong airport during COVID.
No.
That was literally, okay, I was flying past midnight, so there was only two flights, my flight to Seoul and another Cathay Pacific flight. But there was literally absolutely nothing open.
Wow. That
No
is really
cafe.
surprising because I have been to those domestic airports up in Shamjeon and Chongjin, and I mean their services were limited to the point that like our tickets didn't had our names handwritten on them.
Yeah, but I can't remember about Samjeon, but in Chongjin, which is actually Orang Airport, it's called Orang Airport. In Chongjin, they have like a cafe
Mm.
at the terminal, and it's functioning. The only problem that, again, they ask you to change money for them, stuff like that. Um, but yeah, so basically we have Pyongyang Airport and Wonsan Airport. Those two airports are pretty much international standards in a sense that they have duty-free shops, restaurants, cafes, um, jet bridges, proper check-in facilities with computers working, proper security. Um, it's just much smaller.
Mm.
And again, certain rules are not taken that seriously. For example, the smoking area is right in the coffee shop. So there is no like, and there's just like, there's a non-smoking sign on certain tables, and then you can ask an ashtray to desks or tables. Um,
I've forgotten about that. That's true. You
but,
can't
but but
just
but but
smoke.
yeah, but that used to be the play. That used to be the case in many European and I'm not sure about America, but in many European airports until the EU smoking laws came into action. Like you could smoke
Yeah.
in a pub in Hungary until 2010-ish.
Mhm.
So it's, and also don't forget that as far as I know, one of the latest, if not the last country to ban smoking on an aircraft was Japan.
Oh, actually doesn't surprise me.
Um, so yeah, so Pyongyang and Wonsan Airport are pretty much up to international standards. It's just much smaller than other airports
They
outside North Korea,
mm,
and some of the rules are not taken that seriously. But that's the only difference. You might think that you are in a domestic airport, probably in South Korea or uh, in the US,
yeah.
which serves very few flights. And then you have the rest of the country, like Orang Airport, Samjeon Airport. They are pretty much like just a landing, like a runway, a tarmac, and then a train station building.
Yeah. That's a really accurate description. Yeah. Um, it's very valid to note the massive differences between Pyongyang and, for example, Samjeon, because Pyongyang feels like, as you were saying, Greg, it just feels like a normal airport. I mean, not normal, but it feels like a very modern airport. It's beautiful inside. You've got very squeaky, clean floors. You've got really nice toilets. And just such a normal thing. But in North Korea, you don't necessarily have the best toilets everywhere you go. And you even have things, I mean, you have all the touristy souvenir stuff, but you also have Wi-Fi as well, right? Have you ever tried the Wi-Fi in the second floor?
I never tried the Wi-Fi, to be honest.
So I have never tried it because of two reasons. So the first one is because it's in the departures lounge in the second floor, the international departures lounge. And when I'm leaving North Korea, I do not need Wi-Fi because as soon as I land, I'm going
Mm.
to get internet on my phone. And usually I still have some, I mean, when we go into North Korea as tour leaders, or when we're working there, usually we have a SIM card with Wi-Fi on, with internet on, so we don't need it. But I did want to try it once. So I went to the desk. It's a really complicated system. It's not easy. You have to first go to the Wi-Fi desk. I mean, yeah, you have to first go to, it's actually a room. I don't know if you've ever seen it, really far back. Um, and it's like this telecoms communications room. And I guess that they must have previously used it for like phone services, like in the Yangakdo, where you can make
Mm.
international calls. So I guess that's what they used to do with it. And now you go there to buy like a Wi-Fi credit. So it's just like a piece of paper, and then you just use that password. I guess it's like a one-time password thing. But it didn't work. I tried it, I bought it, it didn't work. So yeah, as
Did
with
they refund
everything.
you?
No, but to be fair, I didn't ask for a refund. It's
Ah,
it's one of those things where there's lots going on and you're like, "Ah, I just wanted to try it anyway." And it's not
okay.
terribly expensive, maybe a couple of dollars.
With all due respect, let's send Simon in, and then we can figure out if they're going to give a refund or not.
Yes. He'll always make sure he's never wronged.
Actually,
Uh,
maybe you could do a podcast with Simon on this kind of like challenging the system.
yeah.
Uh,
Oh, yeah, that'd be an interesting one. How do you politely challenge North Korea? Do you have anything else like aviation geek nerdiness that I mean, sometimes I might not know the questions to ask because I don't know the things. So like, is there any other interesting points about Air Koryo or Air Koryo's fleet or getting a flight in North Korea? Is there any differences between getting a flight to North Korea than getting a flight to anywhere else in your experience? I mean, you've probably taken a lot of flights in your life. You document
well,
them on Facebook. I love seeing them.
well, yes and no. So I don't want to be sensationalist that like, it's very different from. No, it isn't. But if you keep your eyes open, then you can see certain, behind the scene. Oh, no, it's not so behind the scene differences. First of all, the check-in process, as I pointed out, it's taking ages. Because the Air Koryo system is cut off from the international ticketing system, so everything have to be, put into the computer on the spot. And the second is that those North Koreans who are returning are usually returning after spending quite a few times overseas, and they, are taking back TVs and quite a lot of stuff. So for them to check in all the stuff again takes a lot of time. But also you can see, like once, for example, I was in the duty-free shop at Beijing airport, and there was a North Korean flying back to Pyongyang shopping in front of me, and then and the counter, he ended up paying over 800 US dollars for whiskey and
Ooh.
tobacco for cigarettes. And he even had loyalty card for that
That's really funny.
for that
Duty free.
duty free shop. And also you can see the Air Koryo station manager and Air Koryo staff pushing trolleys full of 7-star cigarettes
Yes, I
and
just wanted to
whiskey
say, I just go
towards
on.
the gate, and then they smuggle it into North Korea. There was a okay, no, I won't badmouth the competitor, but like okay, anyways,
You can. I actually go really into detail in one of the podcasts. Not into detail, but like I badmouth them and name them in one of the episodes. So if
I
you want
see.
to, yeah, go for
Okay,
it.
so and that's why I was, and it happens all the time. And of course, not we don't know how cigarette gets into North Korea right now, but there were some misrepresentations of the fact or truth in one of the NK News articles about, and it's not NK News fault, it's the person who gave insight into cigarettes in Western cigarettes in North Korea. That I can't remember what exactly he said, but it was like, come on, like if you are flying Air Koryo, you see all the time how cigarette gets into North Korea.
Hmm.
And then also another thing is that on the flight, there are not only pilots and uh, air hostesses or flight attendants, but also other pilots who are in the cabin, or at least their badge says it's pilot. Um, um,
What are they
and they
doing there?
just sit there. Oh, actually, once I was flying business when we took the filming equipment in for um Michael Palin, and one of these uniformed staff members was sitting also in business, and I saw him doing load sheets and like balancing, like where they calculate the balancing of the aircraft.
Oh, that's interesting.
So they might actually be pilots or engineers.
Mm.
And actually, it would make sense because they don't have that many flights. It would make sense that one crew flies into Beijing and other crew flies
Mm.
to Pyongyang.
Mm.
Just to keep the staff uh, in practice.
Mm-hmm.
But for example, on domestic flights, they do have people who probably work for state security, because
Mm.
they are the ones who would tell our guide to tell me to tell the tourists that from this point on, no photographies, please.
Oh, yeah. And what I'm really curious because I've never flown business class with Air Koryo before. What is flying Air Koryo business like?
You sit. Okay, so you have access to the lounge in Beijing airport, which is good. And then you have more. I think for business class, it's 40 kilograms check-in luggage from Beijing to Pyongyang and 30 kilograms from Pyongyang to Beijing. And again, because they want to accommodate North Koreans who are taking a lot of stuff back to Korea. So it's a 2-2 configuration except instead of the 3-3. So basically, you are sitting in an armchair. You get a welcome drink after boarding and a wet towel. They offer you alcohol like beer as well, and you have a full hot meal, a
And
full meal service.
and that would be
Uh,
North Korean beer, I guess. Some Taedonggang.
yes, yeah, it was the Dongan, yes.
Lovely. Do you get a newspaper as well?
Yeah, but you get newspapers on economy as well
Yeah,
if you are flying
true.
in
Until
airport.
they run out, though, I feel like sometimes they start giving it, like if you're a big group of foreigners, they start giving like one per row. They do get a bit stingy by the end of it.
Yeah, that's true. Yes.
Um,
And sometimes they are reluctant to give you a Rodong Sinmun if you're asking for that.
yeah,
One of
exactly.
those, it's only for Koreans
Yeah.
argument.
Yeah, the Rodong Shimbun, for people that don't know, is the Korean language North Korean newspaper, whereas foreigners in the airplane, they will usually get given the English language North Korean like foreign publication.
Called Pyongyang Times, yeah,
Called the
or the
Pyongyang
DPRK,
Times.
or the DPRK pictorial, yeah.
Ah, thanks. A couple more questions if you still have time.
Yep.
Just as we're cropping up. Um, when we were chatting about cigarettes, people might be quite confused how you can get boxes and boxes of cigarettes or boxes and boxes of alcohol into North Korea. What it's funny because most people don't think about this aspect when they think about what you can bring into North Korea. Mostly it's like, can I bring my laptop? Can I bring my phone? Can I bring this? Can I bring that? You're not allowed to bring Bibles, you're not allowed to bring this kind of stuff. What about in terms of, normal international law when it comes to customs? Like, what can you bring in terms of alcohol volume and cigarettes and stuff like that? Is there anything that you need to look out for, or?
No, so usually what I say to my customers during the pre-tour briefing, that when we talk about entry into the country, that North Korean customs care a lot about things other countries don't, and they don't care at all about things other countries do.
That's a really good way to describe it.
With the result that you can buy or bring in as much alcohol, cigarettes, perfumes as your finances allows. and as much as you can carry. So
Yeah.
there is absolutely no limit on these products. And they won't, oh, okay. I never go overboard. I think the maximum I took in was like 5 cartons of cigarettes. But they never, okay, there wasn't like a customs officer. Do you have anything to declare except for your, phone and stuff? They
I
never
think
cared about my cigarette, and I didn't have to pay for my tax. And it also goes through the X-ray machine, so they definitely see.
I think they're missing a trick there, because they could be confiscating these items and then disappearing that into the system.
Yeah, we are giving so many tips
I know.
for
When we
let
go
me
back, it'll be a different place for all of those North Koreans listening to this podcast.
thank
North
you for all your recommendations. We improved our country.
North Koreans abroad, though, you mentioned that, a lot of them, or, there are at least some North Koreans that are stocking up on everything and taking it back to North Korea. Do you often see North Koreans on the flight? I mean, this time around, we're not going to get around to talking about the train so much. We'll have to do that next time. But on the flight, do you see a lot of North Koreans, and have you had any interesting interactions with them, if at all? I find that they are more friendly on the train, but maybe that's just because
Yeah,
sometimes you have to
no,
sleep next to them and you're drinking with them and stuff.
no, that's true. Yeah, there are always North Koreans on the flight. I haven't flown Air Koryo, and there were no, I'm lying. Maybe at least once, but it was during. I'm not sure if that flight was supposed to happen. Like, I was actually quite surprised it wasn't cancelled last minute, because that was such a low load factor. Maybe the flight back was more busy. But no, there are always North Koreans on Air Koryo. And honestly, I never had any conversation because I'm not the person who would start conversation. And I think as a start, I might come off as a cold person. Maybe you could say a lot more about that when I was.
I wouldn't say that at all.
Well, when we talked about how unfriendly or ignorant I was when you were still working for the other company.
That's true. You were cold to me.
Anyways, so I'm not the person who would initiate a conversation with strangers, and probably I don't look like one with whom other people would. However, once a flight attendant, it was a quite empty flight, and actually that's when I was flying into Pyongyang for my language course, for to live in Pyongyang in quotation marks for a month, and then suddenly the flight attendant just sat next to me.
Oh.
Saying that she sees me all the time on the flight, what's my name, what I'm doing. It was quite sweet.
Yeah.
And no, like some people would say that she was trying to get information from you, and it's like, but that's like, what, they don't need a flight attendant to get information on me, so.
True. Yeah. What information is she going to get? What do you know?
What my colleagues don't know already, or what they won't figure out in 1 month why I'm there. So it was quite sweet. And also to have the courage to sit next to me.
It's quite unusual.
Quite unusual, yeah. And it's also unusual that they would respond to me in Korean if I respond in Korean. Sometimes I have to ask the flight attendants if they really speak Korean, because they just like look at me as if I was speaking Hungarian when I talk to them in Korean. And also when I was flying into Pyongyang for the first time as a tourist, I was seated at the emergency exit row. And that's where you are seated facing one of the flight attendants. And she also started a conversation. First, to the passenger sitting next to me, that, okay, where are you from? And he said from the US. And then that was an awkward reaction because then she didn't know how to handle this information. and and then she, but then she started to, and we were like the approach to Pyongyang airport was over the city actually. So she was pointing out certain things, and also she asked us how we like the water on the flight because it's
Oh,
it's produced in the DPRK, and then there were some propagandistic elements in her conversation. But still, she started a conversation, and in a sense, she wanted us to learn more about her country even before we got there. So it was nice.
yeah, that's really nice.
Actually, there's one thing we shouldn't forget about when we talk about Air Koryo, and that's when we cross the Amnok River.
Okay, I actually don't know. Go on.
So when you cross from uh, China into North Korea
Mm-hmm.
over the Amnok-gang, the Amnok River, uh, they will make an announcement that now we are flying over the Amnok River, and this is where President Kim Il-sung led through the victorious liberation army to, and that's where he returned to Korea, and to get rid of the Japanese colonizers.
Excellent. Yeah. Yeah, I remember that announcement actually. That is a very big difference between Air Koryo and other airlines, I think. You don't get that kind of announcement in other airlines.
Yeah.
And finally, I don't want to keep you too long, but when we fly into North Korea, there's actually another airline, right? It's not actually just Air Koryo that flies into North Korea. There is also Air China,
Yes.
right? And I think so some people who've been to North Korea with us or with another company, will know that because they've been booked onto the Air China flight or the Air Koryo flight. What is the difference? Like, why are some people on the Air China flight and some people on the Air Koryo flight? And what's it like flying an international airline into North Korea? Is there any big difference in that?
Nothing at all. They just don't tell you off for taking pictures.
True. I don't think I've ever been on Air China into North Korea, which is really
Yes,
annoying because
you were.
oh, was
Like
I? Which one was I?
the one we were just talking about, 2019 April
Oh,
Thursday tour. You were the one who were in charge of the Air China
oh.
force.
Damn you and your attention to detail. Because I mean, maybe at that point I wasn't taking so many videos and photos because I then remember maybe my next few flights were then Air Koryo because the air hostess started to recognize me trying to take photos so many times that like one time I got onto the flight and she looked at me and like was like, no photos. She remembered me from the last time. But I guess the reason why some people are put on Air China and some on Air Koryo, that's just the day of the week, right?
So we don't really use Air China. We only use Air China if someone requests to fly Air China because they have concerns over Air Koryo. Interestingly, and I'm not sure what's the actually once I was talking about it with the Hong Kong people who are working in the airline industry, they are air traffic controllers, that most of the times if there is a request not to fly Air Koryo but use Air China, which is again for various reasons, it's interesting that a Hong Kong person would demand to fly Air China, is Hong Kong people.
Okay.
So to be frank, I only had customers from Hong Kong who requested not to fly Air Koryo out of um, safety concerns. So basically, Koryo Tours uses Air Koryo as a default, and we only use Air China if someone requests to fly Air China, or if their dates, sometimes the dates that okay, you can't fly Air Koryo on that day because there's no Air Koryo flight, but there's an Air China flight, or if the Air Koryo is overbooked.
So I guess it's less of a love for Air China and more of a concern for Air Koryo is why someone would request to fly Air China.
Yeah.
No, fair enough. Okay, do you have any more aeroplane geek, aviation geek nerdiness to share with us before we part ways?
Not really, but they can check the blog on our website or the Air Koryo travel guide on
Yes, we do have a
koryo.com.
great, yeah, we
Uh,
have a, go on.
and you have the history of the Air Koryo, which is a bit similar to the former National Hungarian Airlines history, because the Hungarian Airlines was started after the war as a joint venture with Soviet Union. So was Air Koryo.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, we
that's
didn't even get into the history and into the nitty-gritty details of Air Koryo. So for listeners, you can head over to the Koryo Tours blog. I will put that link in the show notes, so you can visit that and find out much more about Air Koryo. Greg, I'm gonna have to get you back for another time to talk about everything else. You know, we touched very briefly at trains at the start. We didn't really get into trains. We didn't get into the domestic trains, tram, trolleybus, cycling through North Korea. We didn't get to any of that. So I'm gonna have to steal you again at some point. But for now, I will say a massive thank you from me and all the listeners. And yeah, I'll speak to you probably very soon.
yeah. Thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to be back on.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. All right, thank you so much and see you later.
Yeah, thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye, bye bye, bye bye.